Thank you. Doom.
Hello everyone. We are Lab212, Nicolas and Beatrice. Today we're going to talk to you about less is more, work to achieve. It's a sentence from Mies van der Rohe, the Bauhaus. It means that the less you do, the less you show, the more it is, but it's definitely not less work to achieve this.
The Lab212 was founded in 2008 in Paris. We all graduated from Les Gobelins School. We came from a new media interaction and design, and we have different skills from cinema to engineering, and also architecture, for example. Since several years, we try to reveal to installations intangible phenomena, like, for example, vibrations of the wind, of the sound. And more specifically, we will talk about one project today. Here's the short view of selection of some projects. Logo. So today we'll talk about simplicity. When we talk about simplicity, for example, in fine art, we can talk about minimalist movement, or in architecture, we talked about the Bauhaus, for example, and in new media, we thought it was interesting to talk about John Maeda. John Maeda is an artist and a coder. It was a teaching at the MIT Media Lab since 12 years. And he had some famous students who created processing, Fry and Caserias, sorry. And in 2006, John Maeda tried to sum up in a book. He made some research to try to define a way to achieve simplicity inside a project or an idea. And after lots of interviews, he tried to sum up some tips in order to try to see, okay, how is it possible and what is the benefit of trying to work with simplicity. So it's a motto we rely in our work, and we will make some connection during the presentation to a specific project. This project is called Passifolia. It's a project we made with Nicolas and a big team around in 2020. And it's a project about emptiness. And our idea was to suggest a forest, a path in the forest to an empty room. And we wanted to try to give a materiality to the light and the sound for the visitors. It's a collective installation. So a short view of the final installation. So in 2019, Hermès came to us to propose us to do a carte blanche for an event. In fact, it was the launch of a new table service. And this table service was called Passifolia. So Passifolia is a reference to a flower called Passiflora. It's an exotic one, very beautiful. They worked with an artist, an illustrator called Nathalie Roland-Heckel. You can see her here. Lots of drawings were made by hand, very beautiful, with bright colors. And we were also interested in the process regarding how she was working, because it's also is interesting for us to make some connection about that. And what we found interesting, for example, is the fact that in the collection she was mixing realistic plants and also imaginative ones. So we found interesting to have this specific or singular point of view regarding the nature and to think about juxtaposition and a shift between real and maybe something more linked to the dream, I would say. So we saw directly to the work of the douanier Rousseau, Henri Rousseau, in the early 19th, regarding also this idea of luxuriance, lots of colors, also with a kind of naive approach. And we were thinking a lot, and after some discussion with Nicolas, we like to often work on an emotion, or for example, a specific memory of an event. And when you talk about nature, we were thinking of a path in the forest. You have the smell, you have the humidity, and you also have the beautiful rays of light coming down through the forest, through the trees. So we really wanted to try, in fact, to let the visitors be able to touch the light and to feel the light on his skin, the warmth of it. So kind of something tangible, but also a little bit sensual, I would say. So we try to focus on this specific idea in a dark room with no border, no frontier. You have an idea of an infinite space, and we have some vertical rays of light inside which the visitors can have his own path. And regarding his path in the space, it will have an impact on the global installation regarding the light and also the sound ambience. Here, the very short example of a light opening and closing. When we work on project, we like to rely different kind of approach, I would say. So we work a lot with sketching, but also in the same time, we try to think about how it could be materialized in real life. And what is interesting here, it's a very simple compartment, just opening and closing a light. But when it's beginning to move, it means that in fact it becomes alive, and the light becomes to have its own behavior. And we was interested in that approach and to work on this specific approach. And as it's a minimalistic project, we worked a lot, and we often work a lot regarding the scale on the element in space. The idea was to play with the height of the space regarding this verticality of elements, and also with two different states. There are this closed light, and when you come behind it, it opens, and you hold the light embraces your body. So it's you feel comfortable. It's very weird, but you are like in a cocoon. We continue to think in a more global way regarding the path of the visitors inside the exhibition, because the experience had to be for 500 visitors on one day, so it was a global constraint and also interesting to think about it.
Yeah, so technically, how to control this light beam to open it? Like, it's very simple behavior, as Beatrice said, but to achieve that, you need a pretty heavy light projector. So these automated lights, which are meant to usually move 360 in all different directions, it would be fixed, but we would use all the feature of aperture and to make like the ray light very sharp. We worked with a light engineer, Mathieu Caban, who helped us to know all these technical gears, all these light projectors. And what you see on this picture is that to materialize this light beam, you always need to have some kind of smoke. Otherwise, as you see on the left, there is you just see the dot on the ground, but you don't see the light beam. On the right, you see it. And what we learned, I would say the hard way, but no, that smoke is not fog, is not haze. The density and the size of the smoke particle is very different. And it has a huge impact aesthetically, but also technically, as you will see later.
Also, to have all this constraint in mind and this idea of the concept we wanted to work with, we were influenced by the work of several artists. For example, we've put three here, one from Mia Ando, this pass, very beautiful on the water, the work of Sue Fujimoto architects, who've done a show with very beautiful lights, and also this idea of a very minimalistic rhythm in space, and a very nice project of UVA and Bernie Krause called the Great Animal Orchestra, which is a recording of sound in the nature. Bernie Krause is a musician, and he has recorded hundreds of sounds in the nature since several years. He made an archive of that, and in this specific installation, you can rediscover some of his records. And what is important here, the fact that lots of animals and insects since then has disappeared regarding the climate crisis. So it's like a testimony of a soundscape that already has disappeared. And in Passifolia, we had also the chance to work with a naturalist guide who helped us because he recorded lots also of sound of nature. He's already done lots of that before, and we had the chance to work with him to use it, and also with the musicians Chapelier Fou. But it was important for us to work on a real basis with bird sounds, for example, or the sound of the wind. Here is an example of the sound, just to give an idea of what we wanted to do. An ambient sound with more localized sound triggered by the visitors. And what is interesting with the sound is the fact that even if it's a black, even if there is nothing, as you have very localized sound, your mind can recreate the space. And we really believe in this specific power of your mind regarding in link with the sound to recreate your own space. So you can close your eyes if you want. So it was just an example of the mood we wanted to create. At the end in the installation, we had 12 ambient speakers, and then with 16 directional elements or speaker, but
yeah, technically, as Beatrice said, we wanted to localize very precisely the sound, so to achieve this spatialization experience. So it was different technical option possible for that. The first one is stereo, and the extended stereo is Dolby, but it's designed for a static audience, so it was not useful for us. So we went for some more. We found some more complex system with kind of network, and with the software you can decide more or less where it goes. But we went for a simpler solution somehow, but more directional. The thing with the previous solution was next to each other you would hear more or less the same thing. It was not individual. We wanted to have some very individual experience under the light beam. So we went for highly directional speakers. the problem with highly directional speakers is that usually it doesn't work that high. We wanted something 6-7 meters high, and usually they are designed for 2 meters or 1.5. So it was not easy to find, but the sound engineer we worked with, Baptiste, found a French startup, Acoustic Arts, who designed this new product, which is highly directional speakers, something like 30 degrees angle, which is very small and was good for our purpose. So we experimented with this one.
We also had to think about the real space, and as it was for the launch of an event, we were thinking about having two different parts of the experience. The first one with the light beam and the pass inside it, and the second one you're just in a space very bright and only with the dishes, with the color. The first one is just black and white. And yes, the idea was to play on this contrast between the both. And also we won't explain the second part because it was interesting, but we think it was more like meditative ambience, I would say. The more interesting part was in the first one. So regarding the space, as it was for several people in the same times, in general we had like, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 30 or 40. We were thinking about Élysée Montmartre in Paris. It's a very nice place, Art Nouveau, very big one. So we went there, we took some pictures, we tried to make some quick 3D model. We began to think about the implantation of the pass inside it. The idea was to play with the circulation, to let the visitors come behind the light, because if you see everything like stable, you're not able to see it's interactive. So the idea was to help the visitors to go behind it regarding the entrance and then the exit. Also an interesting question for us was how to represent the light, just as in sketches, for example, for us, as a discussion, but also for the discussion, with Hermes. After trying several approaches regarding having something more realistic, we found it was more interesting for us to have something like more sketchy. So it's a simple 3D model with a little bit of Photoshop. The idea was to not lose too many times on having something too realistic, but to just focus on the rhythm, the high, and also some elements which were interesting, like the transparency behind it. And what is interesting at the end of the project was just we show this kind of elements, and the project manager at Hermes said, "Oh, that's crazy. The installation is really like your drawings at the beginning." And even if it was like very simple, but yes, the idea was here, so the connection was done. Regarding some budget aspect, finally we had to go to La Gaîté Lyrique, even if it was for Hermes, the budget was too high, because one of the big obligations on this installation was the setup. We weren't able to rent the place for like 10 days as we wanted. We had the maximum like 3 days to set up two rooms with lots of hardware, so it was one of the obligations. Also the height, because we wanted to have something very tall, so for a test it was a little bit complicated, as you will see after, but we had the chance to make some tests in theaters. And all the hardware, finally, we just put everything together the day, 3 days before the event, because as it was, again, lots of hardware and setup we've done on small scale, but it's okay for us as we are able to test what we want to test. So in La Gaîté Lyrique, La Grande Salle, it's a cube, a dark cube, dedicated in general to concerts. So it has no specific character, but what what is nice here is the fact that it has lots of structural, for example, structural sailing to hang up lots of elements. So for us, it was very nice. And as we were thinking about the path in these lights of beams, we were testing different approach, like something geometric, something like, yeah, very simple with this idea of circulation in mind. And we were thinking about the golden ratio. What is interesting with that is the fact that it relies to, for example, fine arts, but also architecture, since the Greek temple, for example. And when we were talking with Nicolas, he said that, yes, but it's also in the nature. In fact, you have, for example, the Fibonacci sequence here in these plants, the aloe polyphylla. And we thought, yes, okay, it's very nice because it makes a connection with the initial idea, even if it's, again, very simple, just 16 light in space with specific sound. With this organic approach, it's a plan view of the installation. It makes a connection with the nature, because even if for the visitors you don't have this view, you don't have a bird view, your body feels the fact that it's kind of a growing, it could grow, in fact, a growing setup. So we try to adjust it to the space, to limit too many rental of the material, and also thinking about different point of view. It gives you an idea of the scale. And also, at the end, we also were seeking to represent the fog, as Nicolas said about it, and he will talk a little bit more about it. And what was interesting also in the installation was the fact that at the end, I think it was a journalist that said that, okay, we feel in fact like a plant when we are here because we are under the light, and it's like the
photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis, thank you. So you do, in a way, your own photosynthesis because you really feel the warmth of the light because it was powerful light. So, yeah. But we had to face lots of
Yeah, the big question was how to make that light beam tactile, how to allow the people to touch the light and it reacts exactly when you touch it. So this is the basic setup, light beam, someone on the ground, and the path of the light. The very first idea we had was to use light-dependent resistors on the ground. The light-dependent resistor is detecting when it's in the shadow or depending on the light intensity. So we could use that to detect the shadow of the hand when it cuts the light beam. So we went for a very first test. This is the first test. It's a light-dependent resistor on an Arduino, so mounted with on an Arduino, and then it's connected to the computer. On the computer is running a very small sketch with processing. And when the Arduino senses that the light-dependent resistor is changing, it sends a trigger to the program which widens a circle or closes it. And the program is projecting on a video projector, which is facing the light-dependent resistor. So it was very sensitive. It worked perfectly as we expected. So we thought after that prototype, okay, the technical part is done. But to implement it was a bit more difficult. This is a second prototype on an ugly carpet, whatever. And it implied to pierce the light-dependent resistor in a circle in the carpet. So we thought it might be difficult in a 500 square meter place with black carpet everywhere to do that exactly under the light beam. So we thought, okay, it works, but there is some drawbacks to that solution. We thought of another solution, still with light-dependent resistor, using a reflector on the ground and the light-dependent resistors on the ceiling. Thing is, it implied the reflector on the ground, and it was very minimalistic installation, so this would kind of break the magic. Plus, it would potentially change the shape of the light beam. Still, we did quick prototype, but we kind of didn't keep this idea. Another idea was using an infrared barrier. like the one in the highways or to count cars. This is heavy-duty stuff, but same problem as the previous one. You need a reflector on the ground, so because the carpet was too dark to reflect the infrared light beam. So we thought of another solution that was LiDAR. LiDAR is giving you a measurement using the speed of light. It sends a light beam and it waits for the bounce on a surface and gives you, calculating with how fast it went to bounce, gives you the distance. And we found LiDARs that has the perfect angle to superimpose the light beam. So we did some tests. Here is 2 LiDAR, one under the other one, and 7-segment displays that you see 7 meters when you're not in front of the LiDAR and 47 centimeters when you're in front of it. The potential issue with this was because the LiDAR is transparent, you don't see where you are targeting it, where you're pointing it. We had to think of some system to point it, to target it. So we were thinking of lasers, but lasers that align with the LiDAR. So the red laser that you turn it on just to calibrate it, and then you turn it off, and you have the perfect alignment. Thing is, lasers are not, you need to calibrate it, so we came up with 3D printing systems with spring-loaded screws to adjust first the laser with the LiDAR, and then we did test this, but the problem is it was sensitive to smoke. Remember the previous slide, smoke is not, fog is not haze. Smoke definitely jammed the LiDAR. Fog, a little bit, and haze still a little bit. It was a little uncertainty, but it was too much of a risk to go with this solution. Still, you see here it works, like the little red LED that turns on, it senses where the distance is changing, so it senses you. So it kind of worked, but was risky. So we tried another solution, which is sonar, like ultrasound sensors, same as LiDAR, but instead of measuring the distance of light, it measures the distance, the time it takes for sound to bounce on a surface. There is few sonar that works this height, but we found some and we tried them. Here you see with same 7-segment display. We tested it. I think there is sound. Yeah. Here with like basic smoke, it wasn't jammed. As you see, the light turning on. Okay. So this one would work. It worked with the right height, like prototyping how you can. But we heard that like the startup that was designing the directional speaker told us might be jammed with the sonar system. So we talked with an engineer, a friend of us, who told us, "Hey, wait, what did you think of camera analysis? Basically, when you touch the light beam, it spreads the light around it. So you can detect that because the camera sees when you don't touch it, that's what it sees. When you touch it, there is a huge more amount of white pixels. So, and this engineer friend happened to have developed a program for a medical purpose, which was doing almost exactly that. So we did test in real condition using real light beams. We even tested the LDR, the first prototype. We tested it here, Beatrice, with a multimeter measuring the resistance of this LDR. And we tested, sorry for the quality of the picture, but you see on the left, we tested different cameras for the camera system and different, here, the cameras. And here you see some LiDARs, we tested different ones, and ultrasonic sensors. But here you see we connected and we translated to MIDI, the protocol, the music protocol that communicates with the light console. But yeah, the ultrasonic sensor was jammed by the ultrasonic speakers, and the LiDARs was jammed by even the haze. So luckily, the camera system was kind of working. We had it required very precise haze density, but it was working. Here is a screenshot of how it worked. It uses a OpenCV library, and it runs on Raspberry Pi. So we went for a full dress rehearsal on the Gaieté Lyrique. This is the system, the automated light, all the things we had to hang on the truss. the ultra-directional speaker, the camera, and the Raspberry Pi. Here is all the team. You see on the left there is John, who was responsible for putting together all the Raspberry, because we need a network for each Raspberry to communicate with the sound engineer, who was running the music, and that was communicating also with the light engineer. Here is what was seeing the engineer, who was monitoring all the Raspberry, the 16 Raspberry with all the program on it. Here is what John was seeing, controlling the network, which was sending to another computer some MIDI notes, opening and closing. Here is the Ableton software with a MaxMSP plugin developed by Chapelier-Fou, who was listening to the server to trigger 16 different notes depending on which Raspberry was triggered. And for each 16 Raspberry, there was 6 variations of the same sound. And this was communicating with the light console of Mathieu. To sum it up, here is a schematic. The 3 things, like the light, sound, sensor, goes to the router, goes to the first computer, and goes to Ableton, that goes to the light, that goes to the sound. And it was over that was another Ableton with 12 ambient speakers around. This is the full synoptic we used to communicate with all the team to make sure we had the right connectors and everything. And yeah, the event arrived, so we set it up, all the stuff. Here you see Mathieu, the light engineer, on the first plan. The thing we didn't expect was how hard it was to align perfectly all the beamers, all the projector. Usually this projector move around, but here we needed perfectly parallel. So it took us 2 hours to set it up straight. Another potential issue was the power of those light beams. You could light a cigarette on this, how powerful it was, and it was burning the carpet. So we had to lower the stuff. No joke. Here you see when they removed the protection, you see some holes.
Nice smell too.
And another issue was like the highly directional speaker were at the early stage of development by the startup who produced it. So the remote control was not addressed. So when you were trying to control one speaker, it would change the setting of the one next to each other. So the sound engineer had to find a solution using an empty carpet roll, putting in his arm, holding the remote control and pointing at the one he wanted to control, not to affect the other ones. And the last unexpected issue was that the electric safety guy turned off all the electricity in the afternoon before the event, and it changed all the parallel light beams. We had to recalibrate it. The haze machine and the density changed, so we had to recalibrate also the camera and everything. But the D-Day, it worked. Here is the experience from the ground.
The weird sound is from my phone, sorry.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you can go to Cyril Diagne presentation if you want, because I think it's the beginning. So
we're open for
see you later. Thank
discussion
you for being
if
here.
you want as well.